Hey, thanks for joining us again at our Living Well seminars, and we're really excited to have Dr. Michelle Shelton back. Again, we've been doing these for a number of months now, and we're just trying to give some resources to those who are viewing and listening so that we're in this together and we can help give some resources, we can bring some expertise in and just kind of talk about some things. And again, if you have questions afterwards, make sure you contact us. We can get you connected with the speaker, or if you just have some questions for the church, we want to help as well. So again, thank you for being here. We started this actually with you 5 or 6 months ago, 5.5 months ago, and it was all about COVID-19, and we just hit this, and we're still in it, and still getting some bad news, and still getting lots of questions and disruptions. So, what do we know now that we didn't know then, and how can we kind of move forward?
Absolutely. No, it's great. Thank you for having me back again. And I looked, and it was April, right?
Yeah.
So we were just at the kind of the beginning stages of this, and we've learned a lot. We've witnessed a lot. We've seen a lot, and I think there's a couple of things to think about in terms of how we're looking at this, how we're dealing with this, how we move forward. So one of the things, and this is the most interesting piece I think of this, is a lot of times when you have stress, when you have a stressful event, when you have some kind of a trauma or significant thing that happens, it happens kind of locally. It happens in one spot, or it happens to a select group of people. This is the first thing that we've seen in modern time that literally affects everybody. So I think we have to just acknowledge and take that into consideration first and foremost. So from where we started back in March and April, and even when I was here that first time, it seemed like it was going to be a bit of a sprint to the finish line, right? It was going to be we just have to pass this hurdle, and then we're through it, right? We're through the finish line, and we can recover, and we can do all those things. And it's turned into much more of a marathon. And to acknowledge the fact that it is a marathon, it is still ongoing, and it's still ever changing, right? And kind of going back to the idea that it's not just a local, kind of a contained event. We're kind of in the throes of it up and down as a group, as kind of a united group worldwide, not even just United States. We're not talking about post 9/11 where it was this catastrophic event and then we pick up the pieces after and take a look and kind of locally decide what to do. We are still in the throes of it. And like you said, we're still hearing the bad news. We're still hearing about disruptions. So what can we do and how can we better prepare? So that's some of the things I'd like to talk about. So the idea of acknowledging that there is still so much that's unknown. But then how do we deal with that? How do we kind of wrestle with that? And then how do we cope? I want to spend some time on coping and building up some resilience.
Well, I guess I'd like you to start maybe there, because again, we hear so much bad news, especially over the last couple of weeks, and we're heading into the fall, and we're just overwhelmed, I would say, at times. And this is one of those segments. So how do we cope as families, as students, as community?
Yeah, and that's the biggest question, right? So we went into this, at least in terms of thinking about, children and our education and our college students and our parents and caregivers and families. We went into this with this emergency learning, right? And this survival mode. That is what we had to be in at the beginning. We had to be isolated, not just isolated from others, which is not good for our mental health and our stress and all of that, but we had to also be inclusive with just our group, right? So those folks that we were in with, good and bad and all of that. So we lost a lot of connections. So first of all, I think we need to build up the idea of connecting, even though it does look different. And some of this I talked about, I know the first time around, but I think it still rings true so much even right now, is the idea of, yes, we do have to put the perspective in that there is a lot of negative that's going on, and there's a lot of aftermaths of all of this, right? Financially, spiritually, marriages and kiddos and their development and jobs and death and illness and all of that. So how can we not pretend that's not there, because it is there and it's a very real stress and all the other stresses that come with it. But how can we either categorize our stress or learn some adapting skills and resilience, right? So categorizing the stress, I use the term triage, and I am pulling this from an emergency room doctor, right, where you go in and they're going to triage the most serious. heart attacks and now in this day, COVID cases, right? First and foremost. But triaging our own and categorizing our own stress. So what is the immediate threat right now that is threatening our anxiety levels, our ability to cope and all of that? What is the thing that I have to take care of right now? And for a lot of parents and a lot of our folks here, it is getting kiddos back to school. What does this look like, right? It's that stress. So maybe there's the idea of a lot of stress comes from lack of control and lack of predicting. So how can we best harness some control? Well, for us as parents, and as an educator, researcher, the idea of what can we control with our kiddos going back to school? What does this look like? What do we need to prepare for? So I would say first to be able to cope by controlling some of what we can control and not the things that we can't control. And that's where the triage piece comes into play too. Another piece to this and another piece to coping is to find a good support system. And support for a lot of different things, and not being afraid to ask for the support, but for support emotionally. So for your own health or the health of your kiddos or your family, for even tangible support. Things like food boxes, right? And I know NCC has been fantastic with this and accepting gifts and donations and those kinds of things. So those tangible items and tangible support, and also just the support of other folks that are going through possibly the same thing. So reaching out, connecting, and finding support, I would say, is crucial right now. I'm going to kind of harken back to the first time I talked and about taking care of ourselves. Sure. Physically and mentally and spiritually. That still has to be on the forefront. It was important then, but I think it's just as important now to consider our physical health and our sleep. Every podcast, every article that I read starts with sleep and the fact that we may not be getting enough of it, and it's understandable, but going back to the idea of sleep. I'd say another piece for coping is to take a look at the stressor as a whole and see what you can really do about it. So there's two ways of coping with a stressor. One is problem focused and the other is emotion focused. Okay. And I'm going to use a super practical example from myself. Last week I was stressing this stress talk, right? And it seems ironic, but I get stressed. I think a lot of my students, I teach at George Fox, I think a lot of my students think, she must not have any stress, right? We just turn her on, we pop her in front of the room, right, do her lecture, she goes home, all's fine. I have stress. I've had bouts of depression and anxiety. So last week I had a low day, and I'm not afraid to share that, and I don't think anybody should be afraid to share that. And I had my kiddos come up and say, but Mom, what if you help somebody by maybe what you have to say or share next week? Okay, so immediately I had to go to problem focus way of coping and saying, you know what, my kiddos are right. I need to nip this in the bud. I need to stop my what if thinking and which we tend to do when we're stressed. And then I need to go into an emotional focused way of coping with that stress. I need to internally find ways to connect with others, to talk myself down, to positively self-talk, to get out there and hopefully help others. Anyway, long-winded answer to what you just had to say.
But it's both of those solution focused, right? I mean,
yes,
you do both of those, not just one or the other.
Not just one or the other. You got to look at the problem itself. I call it a problem focus, but it's a stress focus, right? And what that stressor is. And like I said, for a lot of parents right now, it is going to be the decisions about school and safety and all of that, and then the emotional piece behind it, right? So these are our internal dialogues, and how can we get better at looking at things positively. There's a lot of research on happiness and positivity. Better for our mental health, better for our physical well-being, et cetera.
Right. So let me ask a little bit about the triage. So usually triage, the doctor's coming out and kind of doing that to you or to the people. Yeah. So if we're doing a self-triage, is that what you're asking? Or can we ask other people to help us kind of check our emotions or check our stress? Or is that what you're asking maybe?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. I'm always saying, ask people for help, right? I'm always saying that. There's a lot of there's always been stigma around mental health, and this is something I deal with in my classroom and when I talk about mental health and psychological disorders, and there's stigma around asking for help with stress too, right, and that needs to be eradicated. That needs to not be happening. So yes, by all means ask for others. So it's this idea of kind of a feedback loop,
okay,
right? So if there is somebody that you can bounce off of to say, gosh, I am dealing with this, this, and this. And maybe that person can come alongside of you and say, yeah, but you know what? This is something you can do something about right now, right? And this one maybe let's hold off on.
Right.
And then also the internal piece, because you know yourself, you know your own ability to cope and be resilient, and the areas you're not, right? And be willing to maybe, hand those out.
And I think that's why we suggest, small groups are so important, the church is
Yeah.
so important,
Yep.
counseling is so important. All of those people help
Absolutely.
us kind of do that self-triage as well, or that
Yes.
triage as well. So,
Absolutely.
well, we've talked a little bit more about, going into the fall, and it's pretty anxious times, especially after last week. So what do you suggest for children, students, for families? How can we deal with some of the stress? Because we don't have so many answers, and
Yeah.
quite honestly, it might change between
Yeah.
now and then. So
Yeah.
the way it changes so fast, how do we deal with some of that?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And as a parent, right? So I have 2 kiddos in the high school. I have a incoming sophomore and a senior, and I have a college student at George Fox. So I'm in the middle of it with parents, and I hear you on it because I'm in the constant up and down of are we opening, are we not? What does this look like? Is it hybrid? Is it online? Both at K through 12 level here in Newburgh and other school districts, we're all dealing with this, and at the university level, and then teaching at the university. I would say the first kind of piece or suggestion is the idea of flexibility. And for some, this is hard. I'm a type A personality. I like it just the way, and we're kind of hardwired to want to be organized and prepared. And if we've learned nothing through the COVID experience, we have learned that we need to be flexible and, like you said, ever changing, right? And I feel like half the time I'm living for the other shoe to drop. Right. And so now it's our kiddos, and it's going back to school, and what is that other shoe that's dropping, and what does it look like? So being flexible, and then allowing our kiddos to come alongside that process of being flexible, because they're little sponges, right? They're little mirrors looking back up at us all the time. So what does that look like for us to model flexibility amidst change? Very few people like change, so, but just know that it's there, and acknowledge it and being flexible with it. I would also say to prepare, especially our kiddos, but our parents too as well, in terms of some kind of a routine, of some kind of stability. And again, that kind of goes back to the idea of control, right? If we can't control all the other outside factors, what we can probably control is our own time, how we're going to do this, what works best in our family.
Okay.
And to realize it might not work best in every family.
Right.
What I have been seeing is some kind of flexibility of thought with parents in terms of, I'm comfortable with this for our family, but I'm not comfortable with this.
Right.
And so kind of gauging what does work for your family. I've had, parents that are on a very strict routine and meals and bedtime and getting up and doing homework and those kinds of things. And that, if they flourish in that, that's fantastic. I also have my senior, Tyler, who you know very well, who is a sleep in till 1 o'clock kiddo, and does his best work later on. And for me, that was a challenge at the beginning, but realizing that's how he operates and does best and thrives, I don't want to, go head to
So
head
just
with
because
that
one
now.
family does it one way,
Right.
I don't have to feel guilty because we're
You
not
don't have
doing
to
it
feel
that
guilty.
way.
No, and
We're trying to force square
absolutely
go around circle.
Absolutely. And I would say that another kind of piece of advice is to give yourself a bit of a break, families and parents and caregivers, and realize that there's no such thing as perfect. I know that's probably going to throw a lot of people, but there really isn't. And to give yourself some flexibility to say, we are going to get through this, and it's going to look different for everybody, but we're also going to try the best we can. Another piece that there's been a lot of research and talk about is the idea of developmental milestones, right? So we have kiddos that, are they going to miss out on something developmentally? Are they going to be as prepared? And there's all of those kinds of conversations to engage in. I will say our kiddos are resilient. And our kiddos, a lot of times, are more resilient than even we are.
Right.
They don't have the life experiences that we've had, and the ups and downs and disappointments, and they do have this kind of internal resiliency to them that we might not necessarily have. So for that and for those developmental milestones and pieces, I would, believe it or not, this too shall pass. And so I would pay attention to just, keeping kids connected, I think, is going to be the most important kind of social, emotional milestone piece. And again, that's going to look different. I realize that. But with all of the platforms and opportunities and ways we can connect, even if it's virtually right now, it's going to be positive for our kiddos.
Right.
And so they are going to need that, and they are going to still need that connection.
As a parent, what do they do, or how do we handle when our kids or our grandkids are just, they express some of their frustrations, their emotions? What's the best way to kind of handle that with them?
Yeah, so we also, we need to pay attention to what's going on with them, right?
Right.
Whether they say it or not,
Okay.
because they can also act out,
Right.
So if we see a kiddo that is acting out, that is, reaching their limit, they might not be verbally saying it, but to check in with them, right? But then we also, as parents and caregivers and grandparents, need to have the time and energy to do this,
right?
So, and it might not fall on just one person, and quite honestly, it's going to take a village. Right now, just in general, if we keep the mindset of it is going to take a village, and we need as much input as we can from grandparents, from caregivers, from teachers, from pastors, from siblings, right, and all of that. I would say to just to check for and be asking.
Okay.
Maybe be proactively asking. A lot of parents and caregivers are able to spend a little bit more quality time, and even that is getting to a
Right.
point where it's a lot of quality time. But if there is an opportunity to have a check-in, even if it is just once a day, and even if it is just in the short term, with as many folks who can check in as possible with kiddos,
Okay.
just to gauge that for them.
Good. Now, you work with university students all the time.
Yeah.
So university, what do we do with some of our older kids or our college students? What advice do you have for parents or the educators for that?
Yeah, so yes, I am a professor at George Fox, and I work with actually non-traditional students. So I work with adult students who are navigating work and navigating the same conversation that we're having with their kiddos, and maybe one job, maybe two jobs, and they're going back to school full time. And then I also have experiences on the main campus with the traditional undergrad population as well. And there's the same stressors to keep in mind, and there's the same anxiety. I have researched, though, that the highest percentage of anxiety and depression symptoms over time right now, and the people group that's most affected right now is the 20 to 29-year-old age range.
Oh, wow.
So this is the group that is having higher rates of anxiety and depression, just kind of overall. And so I'm concerned with that. I'm concerned with that going into the fall. There's a couple of pieces to think about, whether or not students are returning on campus or whether or not they're online. And those are two, or something, a mix of both, right? So there's some stressors in terms of, and for parents, having kiddos go back to maybe outside of the state, or others coming into the state and all of that. I will say to tap into the university resources.
Okay.
All universities have university resources, and especially in light of COVID, they've been beefed up. And so absolutely check what the resources are at the university. At every level, whether it's the traditional, the non-traditional, and look at the resources that are available, and I think they would be surprised by that. And if they're distance learning, there's some pieces, and I would say for the K through 12 and for the college student, if you're going distance learning. So I teach fully online and have for a number of years, and the success I see with my students is when they don't procrastinate, when they don't get into this slippery slope. And like I said, this is good information, K through life, right? Not to get into the slippery slope of, well, I'll just be a little bit late on this, and I'll wait till the last minute on this.
Right.
The best prepared students, especially online, because online is different. It's not going to be the same, but with everybody, both K through 12 and university, doing more of a comprehensive, went to the emergency learning, now
Right.
we're in a comprehensive online platforms and learning and engagement. So expect more robust learning, and with that, more work and more time needed to not procrastinate, manage time. Time management's going to be crucial, and then going back to the sleep and eating well and all the other
So the
pieces
scheduling
that
is going to be
help it.
really important.
Schedules are important, and they give us that semblance of control that we need.
And whatever that schedule is, you make
Whatever that schedule is, yeah. Not going to assign a schedule to anybody.
Right.
But yeah, whatever that schedule is,
Okay.
to give a semblance of control.
And again, I really appreciate the idea that we are community, right? As a church, we're trying to come alongside schools and students and families. And again, if people have ideas, we really want to use those, to tap into those resources. One last thing is, you mentioned the number of resources, but we're going to put some at the end that you have talked a little bit about. There's a Stanford study and some Stanford resources.
Yes.
I really appreciate that. Do you want to say anything about some of those resources or some of the other research that you've done a little bit on?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are some great resources. As with anything, there are some that are fantastic, and there's some that you may want to stay away from. But I would say fantastic resources. Stanford University, like you mentioned, they have excellent resources, and like you said, they will put that up. Also, the American Psychological Association. So the American Psychological Association, and I'm kind of in constant research with looking at them because of the classes I teach and the type of classes I teach. But they have resources for just about any people group that is dealing with the stress of COVID.
Oh, okay.
So we're talking about caregivers, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about teens, we're talking about pastors, we're talking about all sorts of folks, and it's very specific to what they are dealing with. So the American Psychological Association, Stanford University. I think I've also put a link to a free ebook in there for kiddos.
Right.
And it's called Hope, Where Are You? And it's stories from across the world of kiddos and how they're wrestling with this, how they're coping with this, what it looks like for them. So that's a good book to kind of sit down with maybe as a family and to kind of process through. And it's a great opening for kiddos to kind of share maybe where they're at also. So that's an excellent resource too.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate your time and your effort and your skills. And again, if we have some other concerns or people who want to contact you, we'll forward that to you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.